The date is 2255. This is about 20 years before the events of Fallout 3. And what we know is that the Brotherhood of Steel under Lyons is Brotherhood of Steel, the one that most of us tend to be more in favor of, are on their way to the Capital Wasteland. And on their journey, they've crossed and passed a number of different locations. One of them is the remains of Pittsburgh, the Pitt. And this location is probably in, I would assume, and we don't know, we don't have a list of everywhere that they went or what every community was like, but I would imagine that the remains of Pittsburgh are one of the worst, if not the worst places that they travel through on their journey. Pittsburgh, if we go back to the time of the Great War, was an industrial city. This was a location that was churning out iron and steel and the equipment that would be needed for war. So we know, based on the events of Fallout 3 and the conversations that we have with some of the characters, that when the bombs dropped, locations like Pittsburgh and DC were some of the first to be hit. I saw a debate online recently about this in one of the forums, and somebody was like, with China being west of the United States across the Pacific, they would have traveled across the Pacific, or they launched missiles and bombs from that side. How is it that the East Coast was hit first? And what some people don't remember is that China was very good at being stealthy. And when it came to interpersonal war and conflicts and soldiers on a battlefield, that meant stealth suits. When it came to launching interballistic nuclear missiles, that meant submarines. There were a number of submarines hidden off the coast in the Atlantic. And the first locations that they hit in the 2-hour war, remind you, the Great War lasted 2 hours. And some of the first locations hit were places like Pittsburgh and DC, and they were hit hard. These locations, years later, still have not recovered. And on top of that, because of the bombing and because of the pollution, the people who are living here are not only affected negatively by the environment and their living situation, but there is a mutation problem. They are having issues. So what the Brotherhood discovers is a community that is barely getting by, people who are on the very fringes of survival, of humanity at all, and on top of that, they can't safely have children, because if they do, the children are very, very likely to come down with a disease, which will turn them into monsters, and not monsters in the rabid ghoul sense of the word monsters. These creatures are different than what we had seen previously in the Fallout games. TDR stands for Troglodyte Degeneration Contagion. They call these monsters Trogs. They look kind of like Gollum from the Lord of the Rings, and they are violent, and unfortunately this is not the kind of thing where if you are somebody wandering in the wasteland and you happen to come across this disease later in life, you're more likely to develop it as the wasteland kind of wears down your system and your ability to fight off diseases. No, this is something that was way more likely to happen to children, which is extremely tragic. Everything about the Pit is dark and tragic, and this is one of the most tragic things. Parents couldn't safely have children without the threat of them turning into monsters. And in those kinds of situations, you can imagine the difficulty in the decisions that you would have to make. If you have a child and it comes down with TDC, I was going to say TDR, TDC, do you keep them? Do you need to get rid of them? This becomes dark. And this was the situation that the Brotherhood comes across. So in Lion's mind, he's going, well, maybe we maybe we stamp this out. Maybe we put these people out of their misery. Maybe we take the healthy children with us to a place where they will be safer. Maybe we use them as recruits for the Brotherhood. The individuals who are here are basically raider groups who are just kind of running on the fringes of society. They probably need to be put down anyway. Or at least that was their perspective, it seems. And so Lyons initiated what would later be known as the Scourge.
Now that's a story. The only reason I'm here is because of Elder Lyons. You see, I grew up in the Pit. Don't suppose you ever been there, huh? It's about 500 clicks to the northwest. Place is a nightmare. 3 irradiated rivers coming together. People there were not well. But the Brotherhood of Steel came down on the place with a righteous hammer. They called it the Scourge.
The Brotherhood sweeps through and they kill anybody who stands against them at all. Anybody who puts up resistance. They do leave individuals who don't, and they kill about half the inhabitants of the Pit at that time. And a reminder, this is almost 20 years before the events of Fallout 3, but before the time that you get to visit as the Lone Wanderer. And everything goes to plan except for one thing. There is a casualty. The Brotherhood, with their advanced technology, their power armor, and the fact that they swept in, basically taking out individuals who were unaware that they were even attacking, put them in an advantageous position when it came to the tactics of the situation. But there was an accident that occurred, and an individual was left behind. Initiate Ashur survives the Scourge, but they think he's dead. He's in a situation where he's in his power armor in a building, and the building collapses underneath him. And from what the Brotherhood can tell, he is dead. They've lost him. And so he gets left behind. But Ashur is not dead. In fact, Ashur is alive. It takes a few days for him to wake up. He's in a coma, more or less. And he wakes up to a woman trying to remove his power armor because she's scavenging things. She's one of the individuals who lives in this area, and she sees this power armor and this soldier who was left here, and she decides that would be amazing to have. Well, in doing this, he wakes up, questions the woman, learns that she and her tribe, her group, are scavenging through the remains of what were left after the Brotherhood came through. And the Brotherhood leaves a lot. They take some of the things that they find most valuable, but they basically created a power vacuum. They took out a lot of the individuals and a lot of the more dangerous members of the raider gangs and the people that were working and kind of overlording in this situation. And so behind that, you end up with individuals who were a little bit less, capable or dangerous, able to take more of what was left behind, some of which was actually very useful. It just wasn't in the best working order, and it wasn't something that the Brotherhood was looking to pick up and take with them or could even take with them. For example, the location that Ashur was in was an operational steel mill. Remember, Pittsburgh was a location that was making metal, steel, iron, and the bones of what would be used to construct things. This was an industrial center. And the steel that this mill could manufacture could be very beneficial to anybody who would be looking to buy it in the wasteland. This situation sets up Ashur to become a leader in this community. He has the training and the knowledge of the Brotherhood, although he doesn't hold on to the ideology. He has power armor, which immediately makes him look like a god to these people and puts him in a situation where he's way more protected and capable against anybody who would stand against him. And these people are desperate. They are looking for a cure. They're looking for a way to better their lives. There's a power vacuum, and they're looking for a leader to take them to new places. And so this is how we get Lord Ashur. And because of the desperate situation of the location and the people, he's taking desperate measures. The people there can't procreate. There are basically laws against it. And in order to refresh the population, they need to bring people in from the outside. So slavers are very common, and there's a lot of justified bad things happening. I'm putting that in quotes. Bad stuff. Everything that you think you would be something people would do when they take advantage of other people, probably happening and probably justified in some way. All of this in the name of science. Ashur has married a woman named Sandra. She is the chief scientist of these individuals, and Sandra has been looking for a cure to the troglodyte disease that everybody has or seems to be passing on to their children. And the solution comes from an unexpected place. They have a daughter, which, again, kind of ironic. They're having kids, but other people shouldn't be. And her name is Marie. And Marie not only does not have TDC, but seems to be actively immune to it. There is something in her biology, there's something in her blood that might be the solution, the cure. So now we're seeing a situation that is fairly common in these games. You have an individual who's justifying terrible acts in order to do something that seems morally good. But, of course, because they are in the position of the one with the most power, they're the autocrat, it's mostly for their own benefit. Because if Ashur can cure his people and create a healthier population who he lords over, then in his mind, that population can be used to expand his power out from just one city, one run-down, broken city, to becoming a regional empire. This is Ashur's plan. And one of the slaves escapes, and you find Werner in the wasteland with a radio signal asking for help. And that's when you're brought into the situation. And you go through the situation, working your way through the game, and I'm not going to go over all the stuff that you should go play this. Go play it. But some of the stuff that you deal with here is fight pits and dealing with losing all of your gear and then getting new gear, including the auto axe. And the fight pits are a very dark development. They're part of what Ashur has designed for this society. You see, Ashur thought that this was actually a progressive policy. The idea that the slaves that they brought in from other places in the wastes could fight in the fight pits in gladiatorial combat, much like the ancient Romans. Where have we heard this concept of using ancient Roman logic and reasoning before, and cultural stuff? In a place called the Hole. And if they won enough of these gladiatorial combats, then they could work their way into joining the ranks of not the citizens, but Ashur's army, which kind of works out for him, because if these people get too rowdy, you throw them in the pit and they die. If they don't die, then they are now battle hardened and able to serve in his armed forces. This is the environment that we find ourselves in the Pitt DLC, fighting for our lives, working our way through this society in order to ultimately make a decision. And it comes down to, and again, this part's a little spoilery, but it plays into the story side of this, so I have to kind of go over it. But the decision that you're given here is, it's kind of like a terrible thing and a terrible thing, a rock and a hard place, but both options seem to be terrible in some way. So it comes down to helping Werner with this uprising and fighting against Ashur. And one of the things that you can decide to do is to take Ashur out, to steal Maria, because she might be the solution to people being able to have children and keep them safe and not turn into monsters. So basically what happens is you fight through the pit, and then if you win enough times, you're granted an audience with Ashur. And Ashur is suspicious of the time that you arrived and all the stuff that's going on, and either, depending on your decisions, attacks you, or you're given the ability to see the research lab and what's going on behind the scenes. So while this happens, Werner is staging a riot and Ashur needs to leave. So you're kind of given a dilemma here. At this point, you realize the research and the science that's been going on behind the scenes, the fact that Marie, I think I called her Maria earlier, it's Marie, might be the solution to this, and you get to choose what you're going to do. Do you let Ashur keep on working on a solution because it seems like they're coming along with something? Do you leave Marie there and go help put down the riots that Werner started? Or do you still push back against Ashur because he seems like a maniacal autocrat and steal Marie? So I put in quotes earlier, bad things or whatever I was talking about before. But yes, that includes the fact that in this DLC, you can steal children. So not only are some of the individuals that I've talked about before, the Brotherhood stealing children from people in the pit, the people in the pit stealing individuals and putting them into slavery from other locations, probably including children, but you yourself can take on the decision to be a child stealer, child thief, kidnapper, that's the word. This DLC has everything. If you've decided that you want to do terrible stuff, this is the one to play. So in stealing and kidnapping Marie and taking Marie to Werner's hideout, where if you decide to do that, of course, Werner and his group can potentially study Marie in order to solve things. But you also find out the rest of Werner's plan. And the plan is to let the Trogs massacre the pit raiders who survived the riot by turning off the lights. There's ways of keeping the Trogs in certain locations. And in order to do that, you would shut down the power plant running the floodlights. This has huge ramifications for Pittsburgh. I was going to say Pittsburgh, but it's not Pittsburgh anymore because there are large sections of Pittsburgh which just get overrun by Trogs and people can't live there anymore. And basically you are creating a massacre again in this location. So yeah, I mentioned that both options seem pretty dark. One of them is keep the leader in power who is lording over these people with some sort of good reasoning, but still doing a lot of terrible things, or help the rebellion massacre a lot of people in order to take power for themselves. And in both situations, there's no guarantee that you're going to get the solution to the disease that is making it so difficult to live in this location. Everything is dark. And there's ultimately not a quote-unquote right choice. It's just one terrible situation or another. And I think, thinking back to when this came out, I remember this being released. I remember listening to podcasts 13 years ago because I was driving in my car a lot. And they helped me with my commute to work or when I had to go to a customer or whatever. And I remember the discussion on some of the podcasts about this DLC and how people were like, yeah, it's really dark. This is really brutal. 13 years ago, Fallout was a different thing. And I often talk about how in the difference between the Bethesda run games and the like Obsidian side, the original crew and then Obsidian who did New Vegas, oftentimes the Bethesda ones tend to be a little bit less dark and foreboding. New Vegas has situations in it that seem darker and more terrible, more serious than some of the situations we get in Fallout 3 or Fallout 4 or 76. The Pit is Bethesda writing at its absolute darkest. If you like this video, then why not check out this other one and continue learning more about Fallout? The Fallout Lorecast was brought to you by our patrons. A huge shout out to them for their support. Head over to patreon.com/FalloutLorecast and take a look at all the cool things you can get for supporting this channel. Also, please like and subscribe, share with your friends, and if you want over 300 episodes of just the audio of this podcast, then check out the Fallout Lorecast on Spotify or Apple or anywhere else.